Welcome to Coffee with Kish. Today I'm going to talk about one of the more unpleasant topics in Mormonism. No, not polygamy. For a lot of people, that's probably the most unpleasant topic in Mormonism. Very fascinating, but also kind of unpleasant. No, we're going to talk about excommunication. Now, I'm talking about this topic because, as many of you have heard, our friend Nemo, one of the Brit Vengers, as they're called, a real gadfly, a real Socrates to the Athens of the LDS Church, has received his summons to a court of love, a euphemism for a church disciplinary council. Now, I'm not keeping track of church disciplinary councils. I've kind of tuned out of church disciplinary councils. Let me tell you why. It's not because they're not important. It's not because they're not devastating to the people who go through them. It's not because it's a topic not worth discussing. I've just kind of tuned out of church disciplinary councils. And let me tell you why. Well, there's kind of a theme in a lot of ex-Mormon podcast, YouTube discussions of, the narrative of, the LDS person who asked questions, who made the mistake of doing it publicly, and who eventually was called in for a disciplinary council and faced what seemed to be an extremely unfair situation, persecution by church leaders against the rules that the church has set down for disciplinary councils in one way or another, whether in how it was initiated or how it was carried out, and then the result of the seemingly inevitable excommunication, and that is followed by the appearance on a podcast or a YouTube channel where this person discusses the awful experience of going through a church disciplinary council and losing their membership. I'm not making light of that in any way. It's very serious. I never wanted to go through with it. But here's the thing. I kind of chose not to. I just chose not to do that. I'm absenting myself from the entire thing. Nemo, I guess he's made of tougher stuff than I am. He decided to make a public nuisance of himself to the LDS Church by calling out the leaders on things that he perceived to be their wrongdoing, and did it so unapologetically, repeatedly, for years on end, and finally, he is called in for a church disciplinary council. Now, chances are that he will be excommunicated. And I'm really sorry that that's the case. I'm sorry for Nemo. Of course, it's not at all pleasant. It's traumatic, devastating to be cut off from a community that you cared so much about. And make no mistake, Nemo got to where he is because he cared. He took the LDS Church very seriously, and he wanted it to live up to his hopes and expectations of what the LDS Church should be. So that's why Nemo is where he is today, facing a church disciplinary council. But the thing is, at least from my point of view, and I'm not really criticizing what Nemo's doing. Nemo's got to do what he's got to do, and there's a certain logic to it. I think it speaks well of him that he's sticking to his guns like this. But, frankly, I don't really expect organizations to live up to their ideals anymore. I want them to. And in the kind of organization that gives the average member a real voice to do something to make sure the organization does live up to its own rules and ideals, certainly I would do what I could do within reason to hold the organization accountable. But here's the thing, the LDS Church isn't that organization. I'm not saying that to criticize the LDS Church. I'm just saying the LDS Church is what it is. It's not set up to be accountable to the members. Now, it may be the case that it was at one time, and I think you'll see that in other branches of the Restoration, and here I'm speaking specifically of the Community of Christ, the former reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. There was more of a democratic spirit to that organization, more democratic process in that organization. Of course, once again, it's not perfect. It's had the leaders' will pushed on the members at times, and it's paid a price for that. Usually, the will of the leaders of the reorganized church have tended in a more ecumenical and liberal direction, whereas the members have been more conservative. In the LDS Church, you've had a very conservative leadership, by and large, that has fought change and excommunicated members that stepped out of line and tried to push more progressive practices and policy changes in the church. Sam Young thought he was going to hold the church accountable. He was going to advocate for the safety of the children. He was going to push the principle of theodemocracy, which is the membership of the church actually having a vote that has real meaning, instead of these ceremonial sustainings that occur. All in favor say aye, everyone says aye. All opposed, you have now marked yourself out as a potential apostate, and your leaders will talk to you about your incipient, if not fully blown, apostasy. So, my parents had this experience, by the way. I've started to drag mom and dad into this, but one time there was a proposed stake division, and a new stake was going to be formed, which would require my family and the families, the other families in the branch that I was attending, to drive, I don't know, something like 100 miles to get to stake conference. And for practical reasons, my parents objected. Like, I don't want to, come on, 100 miles? It was something like that. It was some ridiculous drive to get to stake conference. And my parents thought this was really silly because, we'd been driving less than half that distance to get to stake conference before. And my parents are, really practical people. So they opposed this when the formation of the new stake was proposed that would make them drive so far. And then the leaders dragged them aside and asked them if they were apostatizing from the church because they had opposed the creation of the new stake that would require them to drive all these miles. And, no, they weren't going into apostasy. My mother's still faithful LDS to this very day. But come on a certain level, it's pretty clear that things happen for reasons that are not necessarily revelation. And the order of the priesthood, the idea that leaders are guided by revelation, that will push things that maybe don't make much sense, honestly, frankly. And yet, the average member is expected to obey and just do what the leaders have asked, faithfully sacrificing, obey, obey, obey. Um, in fact, I had a friend in my teenage years, early college years, who had a relative. Excuse me. This friend of mine had a relative an older relative that said to this friend of mine, who was, by the way, a descendant of Brigham Young. This relative said, "There are only three things you need to know about the gospel, son: obey, obey, obey." And I'm sorry that's true. Honestly, that's really true. I mean, it's an exaggeration of sorts, yeah, but it really does capture a truth that there is this spirit about the LDS Church it's big into the obedience to authority, and so let's not kid ourselves. Our friend Nemo, whom we admire, we love, we've watched him for a long time, or maybe you don't. I don't know. I like him. Maybe you don't like him. Maybe you don't like what he does, but I've got that gadfly personality. My dad once told me that my grandfather, and so I come by this Jack Mormon behavior honestly. My grandfather used to say in Sunday school on a fairly regular basis, "I don't believe a word you just said." That was his personality. He was kind of a pot stirrer, to use the more polite form of that expression. He was independent minded. He didn't just go along to get along, and sometimes he could be, frankly, a pain in the butt. Uh, the church doesn't really like that so much, and people didn't appreciate my grandfather that being that way. Nemo wasn't that way in a gratuitous sense. Nemo really expected the church to function in a way that was consistent with its own rules and guiding principles. But it's easy, I think, to criticize from the outside. It's much harder to be in the hot seat leading an organization. The more you're out in the world, the more you're involved in organizations, the more you recognize that this is the case. And usually people who are really involved in running an organization are much more judicious and sparing in their criticisms because, frankly, they know it's hard to keep things running. It's very easy, in a sense, to be a critic. And the internet, YouTube, my own channel, it provides an easy place for us to call out everything. Oh my gosh, I can't believe. Did you hear what this leader said? Blah, 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 blah. Well, in the past, you probably wouldn't have even heard about it. And it wouldn't have made a difference in your life. And you would have gone along merrily, living your life, enjoying being a part of your church congregation, not knowing that elder so-and-so, leader so-and-so said this jerky, stupid thing. But with guys like Nemo and others, and I'm really not faulting him here, people are going to know. And unfortunately, that's just a function of the technology and the access to information that we all have. This is becoming a real problem for organizations like churches. And it's partly because, as members of organizations, we've almost become like super consumers. Like everything that we interact with, we deal with as though we're consumers. which means, oh my gosh, this product isn't what was promised. It's not as advertised. I paid good money for this. I expect that it live up to the advertising. I am angry now and I want my money back, or I quit, or I'm going to another product because this one failed. That's the world we live in, man. That's the world we live in. But I don't know how you have functioning religious communities in that way. I honestly don't. And the problem kind of works both ways, honestly. Remember last time I talked about the corporation, the corporation of the President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and how it was demeaning, denigrating, misrepresentative for people to refer to the church as merely the corporation, especially when it comes to things like, the temple rights and covenants, etc., etc. Well, honestly, there is a sense in which the church does operate like a corporation. So, my relatives many of them come from Utah. Some of my relatives by marriage were connected to early leaders of the church. And they lived in a time and day when you could just go in and talk to a Mormon leader because you lived in Salt Lake. The leader was in Salt Lake, and hey, the door was open. You might just walk in and talk to a leader. Yeah, on your end of things, it may seem like you're just a consumer instead of a member of the kingdom of God on earth, a child of God, someone who matters. And I think the LDS Church tries real hard. It's tried many different initiatives, but frankly, because of the law, because of technology, because of global reach, there's so many factors that really make interacting with the church much less personal. Modern life in that way just kind of sucks. You have to make a really hard effort. You need to try really hard to make participation in your religious community work, and I don't think a lot of people really even want to anymore. I'm not. I'm not. I could be at church this Sunday, right? I mean, nobody would stop me, even though I don't affiliate with the LDS Church. Nobody would stop me from going to a church meeting, and I might even enjoy it, right? I chose not to do it. I kind of self-excommunicated because I didn't want to go through the excommunication process. I didn't want to be put through what Nemo's going to go through. But I just think it's easier to be disconnected, easier to criticize, easier to judge at a distance, a lot more difficult to just be a part of the community for a lot of reasons that have nothing to do with the leaders of the church, nothing to do with its members. In a way, it's just the world that we live in. It makes it so much easier not to really commit to a community. And honestly, I really don't know what the answer is. Excommunication almost seems weird in this environment. I can understand now. I didn't. When I started making this video, I thought to myself, Kish, you really have to criticize. So maybe I thought of it as a critique of Nemo, but a critique of Nemo and John DeLynn when they say that excommunication is a medieval solution for a modern problem. Yeah, maybe. I don't know that I like the way it comes out when they say that, because it's almost as though what they're saying is, oh, it's just so barbaric. And I don't think it is intentionally barbaric. I think the problem is a lot more subtle nuanced and insidious than that. The fact is that excommunication seems barbaric because people don't really take the community as seriously in a certain way. I think it's that when you get to this global organization in this world that's dominated by electronic communication, that it's almost impossible to take membership in the LDS Church seriously in a way that excommunication really makes sense. I've had similar thoughts about going to the temple and why it creeps people out. It's not that I think there's anything wrong with the temple. But imagine you're sitting there in Nauvoo and you're being taken through the endowment for the first time. And you've been recruited by people that you know. And they're leading you through this process within the context of your relationship with them and your common goals. This doesn't really work well when you walk into a building and you're dealing with a bunch of people that, I mean, sure, you belong to the same church, but you don't know these people. And so I think back to the day when, there was a lot more physical touching and people were very uncomfortable with that. And on the one hand, I think, people they're just freaking out for no good reason. I'm sorry, I hate to offend you because, I know that you have good reason. I'm about to actually support your viewpoint on this. The problem is that you didn't know those people who were putting you through those rituals. And maybe some of them did behave in ways that made you uncomfortable. But the first problem is that you just didn't even know them. Imagine how different it would have been if you had really known and felt comfortable with the people that were bringing you through the temple. And what if you had really been prepared and really understood what it was that you were going through? I think the problem with excommunication is very similar. Man, how much do people really deal with their stake president? And even if they do, their stake president is really under the thumb of, especially in these high-profile cases, the top leadership of the church. And top leadership of the church doesn't know you. And in a sense, they even look at the fact that your stake president knows you as a possible impediment for getting rid of you if you're a troublemaker. So, I just don't think the LDS Church can be the community that it was for people who really need a community of people they trust to take these things seriously. And as a result, they probably don't take them seriously in the way that would make them make sense. So there's a very particular way I'm talking about taking it seriously. And it's with regard to the community, that you're part of a community of believers, that there's a level of mutual trust, and that just doesn't exist. Some people are going to be fine with that, and they can deal with that. And for those people, the temple may make better sense, disciplinary councils may make better sense. But I think in scaling up the LDS Church, a lot of this stuff doesn't make sense anymore. Yes. And others have pointed out, in connection with Nemo and with Elder Oak's comments about how there need to be more excommunications. I'm not laughing because I know. Of course I don't know, but it just sounds funny to me. Like there need to be more excommunications. I don't really think that people even understand what excommunication is about. And that it even makes sense. I mean, here's a church that's having a hard time, that's apparently losing a fair number of its members, and it just seems counterintuitive that one of the solutions to this problem would be to find more people out there to excommunicate, because we just haven't, darn it, we haven't had enough excommunications from the LDS Church. It's high time that we saw more. Now maybe it'll work. It just seems odd to me. Let's have more. Let's have more. Let's have more excommunications. We have these problems, and maybe the answer to flagging faith, exodus in large numbers from the ward houses, maybe the answer really is to excommunicate people. And I don't know. That could be the case. Well, anyway, thank you for hanging out with me. This is Coffee with Kish. Please like and subscribe. Please share a video if you like it and you want to put it out there on your Facebook wall or something like that. I wouldn't be averse to that. I would appreciate it very much. So, thanks for watching. Take care. Oh, man. Thank you.